So a question that I have been grappling with for a wee while is, often as Māori we say, ko wai koe, who are you? No hea koe. We don't often say, what is it that you do? Because we're actually interested in which waters do you come from? Another question that I've had at the back of my mind is, what does it take to be a good ancestor? And how do we go about being a good ancestor? So part of those questions have come about in me discovering, what is my whakapapa? What is my genealogy? The whakapapa is a line of descent from my ancestors down to me today, but it's also a layer upon layer of history, of story. It is also an opportunity for me to connect from the heavens to the earth and everything in between. And this is a genogram of the rocks and everything else connected. But how was genealogy shared traditionally as a people? We are an oral, visual and kinesthetic culture. We passed our whakapapa through song, through whaikorero, through speech making, through our stories, pūrākau. It was also embedded in our architecture, in our carvings, in our whakairo. It was also passed from mother to child, and it was also passed through being in community, being around our whanaunga, our relations. We also know of the dreadful harm and trauma of colonization. And my grandparents, who were born in the late 19th century, were both native speakers, but to ensure that their children were going to survive in the 40s and 50s, they were the generation where their language was put to bed. And it was also a time when they just had to learn to survive in the cities. That is me, a little baby born in 1980, my mother on the left, my father on the far right. And unfortunately, my mother passed about 6 months later, and it would be 23 years before I got to see my father and my brother again. I was a whānau, or a gift, to my auntie and her partner, Pāho. I was brought up in a small rural town called Friendly Fielding in the Manawatu. Some of you may have heard about it lately. We just voted yes to Māori wards in our community. But it was a challenge growing up in a very Pākehā town. I didn't have community around me, nor did I have my own elders. And by then, in the 1980s, 1990s, we were the third and fourth generation of whānau that grew up urbanised and away from our homelands. So for me, whakapapa, genealogy, came about like this, a document with names on it. I didn't know who these people were. I didn't know where they came from. And when it came to whenua, land, this was all that I knew. This was a land block somewhere in Waikato. So the questions that were formed early for me was, how do I learn my whakapapa, my genealogy, if I don't have my elders, if I don't have my reo, my language? And also, how do I get to know the stories of my own ancestors? Who do I turn to? I want to acknowledge my first cousin, who passed away, Dr. Godfrey Pohatu. And in my first cousins, he was the only other speaker of te reo Māori, and he was the keeper of our whakapapa. He started the journey, and that old school Mac computer is what he put all of his knowledge and information into. But unfortunately, he passed away, and with him also the password to that computer. So when he passed, all the knowledge and information on our genealogy went with him. So in order for me to understand my whakapapa and who I was and where I came from, what were the steps that I took to make it achievable? Firstly, I went on a big hikoi. I asked a lot of questions as a young person. I was a learner of te reo, and I'm still learning. I did a heck of a lot of research. I got shot down because as a young rangatahi, a young person, I was very impetuous. I demanded information, and I didn't understand that actually you had to earn your whakapapa. I also had to do time. I call it, and others do also, titautanga, which is that you had to do the time in the kitchen. You had to actually listen and spend time doing the mahi before you got access to any other learnings from your own people. So it's important to do the time. And also it was really important that I was open to learn. So I went home. This is my marae, te papa orotu and whatawhata. And someone else that really influenced and impacted my thinking about genealogy is this amazing kaumātua who has also passed away, Pa Henare Tate. For those of you that know him, he is an extraordinary exponent of whakapapa. I've never seen anyone retell or recount generations of information, but I actually met him before I met my father. And he taught a practice called the dynamics of whakawhanaungatanga, which is the way that we relate from a te ao Māori perspective. He was an exponent of these three simple terms: to be tika, to operate with aroha, and to be pono in your practice. But he also introduced this word called momo, which is like typology. And I didn't really understand what that meant then, but it did make sense. Because remember, I hadn't yet met my whānau. So when I say momo, it's the way. So I didn't get to know my family until I was about 23, and there were aspects of me that didn't quite make sense. This is my brother Meta and myself, and I really acknowledge Pa Tate because it was through him that I was able to go home and reconnect, not only to our ancestors, but to actually see the physical connections and interactions between our ancestors. And as I said, 23 years later, I started to learn about the other part of me, my grandparents. And when I say momo, there is the Dunn. I'm a Dunn. The Dunn name is actually from Ireland, but my grandfather, known as Kiro, was an orator in the north. My kuia, my nanny, Helena Moringa. And these are all my Dunn cousins and aunties, and there is a momo about us. And it all made sense when I met them for the first time. And through my journey of trying to understand my whakapapa, we then established a whānau enterprise called Making Everything Achievable, or mea. And mea is a term that we use a lot in the north. And our kaupapa as a social impact agency was to help transform thinking, behaviour and communication. And we were focused on helping to heal historic trauma, and we also wanted to make sure that we could help work with organisations and communities to co-create meaningful legacies for our mokopuna and future generations. Through that window, it also gave me an opportunity to go home, back to my marae in Pangaru, and this is Ngāti Manawa. So what did I learn in my journey of trying to understand my whakapapa? The importance of relationships, the importance of being a kanohi kitea, a face that is seen, the importance of connection, but also I learned to be wary, kia tūpato, be careful. Be careful of the knowledge and information that you are given, but also be careful and mindful of the way that we interact and relate to one another. So the challenges that I faced when trying to find my whakapapa is there were a lot of information gaps. So not only was I needing to learn more about my father's side, I needed to learn about my mother's side and all the generations above me. There was lost information, as I said before. My cousin and all of our whakapapa information had gone. My kuia, she passed away before I was born, so many didn't remember her. So how was I going to get her stories? I also had to rebuild the relationship with my siblings and also my cousins that lived at home. I was still an outsider. We also were still going through the process and still are now of succeeding to our land. But it was also through warm relationships and becoming a kanohi kitea, becoming a face that was seen, that helped forge trust, relationship and connection. So I had spent 20 years trying to learn and understand who I was and where I came from, but I also had to think, what about the rest of my whānau who don't have the same privileges as I do to travel Aotearoa and go and do this mahi? So that took me on another hikoi, which is to go and understand the realm of technology. So in 2018, we entered into a hackathon and I met Ben Tairea, who worked with me to found this company called Aho. When we were designing this new technology platform, we had to consider how do we keep whakapapa information safe? What did we need to do in our design to ensure that the information inside of it was kept tapu and sacred? How are we respectful of that information? And also, how are we going to build a repository for ngā taonga tuku iho, our taonga, our stories, our histories, and keep it safe? The other consideration is that genealogy is a billion-dollar industry, and companies and organisations like Family Search, where your genealogy can actually be tampered with online, 23andMe, who not only have ancestral information, they also support you to get your DNA material taken as well, and ancestry.com, 3 major global companies that work in this space. I was concerned, what do they do with the information that they're gathering? Who controls the data? And when you think about data and where it goes, often it's controlled by large corporates. What are they doing with that information and how do they use it? So for us in building this archival system, we had to do a lot of research. We had to go out and kōrero to our communities. We had to ensure that whānau felt that their information was safe. They had to know that they owned their own data. The system had to be indigenous designed and led. It needed to be secure. It needed to ensure high trust. And we also needed to wrap around training and education so that our people could utilise the archival system easily. I want to take a moment to just recognise my uncle Rihari Dāgavul. Not only was he a pathway for me to fill in the gaps on my grandmother's line, but he was also one of the first early adopters of ahau. And for me, it was really important that if we were going to test our platform on anyone, I wanted to take it home to my own whānau. So this is the system. It's an archival, decentralised system. This is a genealogy of ngā atua, but you could literally put your information in yourself. Inside of the system, you can put in your own stories, your own history, your own photos, and it's a beautiful way for you to be able to have full control over your own information on your own device. And the reason why we built ahau was because we wanted to protect our greatest taonga, which is our whakapapa, our genealogy. So, how might a technology like this help us all be better ancestors? Because even though this has been designed by Indigenous people, it's actually a platform that's open for anyone to use. First up, it was really important when I thought about my whānau and I thought about many of our whānau that live across Aotearoa, it was important to remove the whakamua or the shame of not knowing who you were or where you came from. It was also an opportunity for us to create a space for obligation and responsibility, because it's more than just names on a paper. All of those people, past and present, they all have a mauri, they all have an energy, they all have a life force. Who are they? And how do you take care of that information wisely and carefully? I also hope that with access to this information, it will encourage our whānau to come home. For many of our diaspora whānau spread across the world, they may never come back to their haukainga. And so if they do have a key of information, maybe they might return home. We also wanted to make sure that whakapapa information and stories were available to uri, our descendants. Of course, it helps foster a sense of belonging and identity. And most importantly, it needed to be complementary to the mahi that was on the ground. And I really wanted to just labour the point that this particular platform is complementary to what actually happens in our kāinga at home. So I just want to acknowledge someone else that has been quite pivotal in our thinking about whakapapa. This is Papa Pierre Linden. He teaches Te Mita o Ngāpuhi, or the Ngāpuhi dialect, but he also hosts wānanga on Ngāpuhi whakapapa. I mention him also because he was quite reticent or hesitant to look at technology before COVID. And it was awesome to have him come to one of our wānanga to say, hey, actually, I might open myself up to this because I can see the benefit of technology complementing my role as a whakapapa expert. So my hope is that this system can be complementary to whānau, hapu and iwi activities, that by having access to whakapapa and genealogy, it will help bring healing to whānau. I hope that it will help bring healing and also deepen connections to our marae, our hapu and our communities. And it also acknowledges that in order to unlock some of these pieces, our kaumātua, our elders, are the knowledge keepers. We must keep their stories and their mātauranga alive, because without them, that history disappears with them also. We also want to make sure that this tool can be utilised to help support children and many of our whānau that are incarcerated to have forever access to their whakapapa. We also want to normalise and make archiving cool, and we also want to normalise archiving for the capture of information like this for future generations. So I'm just stretching it out a little bit more because innovation is exciting, technology is exciting, but it's only as good if you can fill it with something. So instead of asking whānau to come to us, yes, you can download an app, but what I'd love to do is I'd love to actually kit up a bus like this. I do hear that you have to have a 3-axle bus because our marae are in lots of different strange locations and you don't want the bus to get stuck in some of these terrible roads. But I'd like to see it kitted out with archival equipment, podcasting equipment, a drone, and a big commercial scanner so that we can go into communities, park up at a marae for 3 days, and we'll invite all of our whānau to come in and they can digitise their information. They don't have to use a hoe if they don't want to, but I think it's a great taonga for our whānau to be able to have their information there for them, and what they do with it, that's their business. But that's something that I'm really committed to working on over the next few months. So coming back to this question about what does it take to be a good ancestor? Reflecting on partake, I have to run the tap over my mahi. I have to be tika, to be correct, to have aroha, to operate with love, and also to be pono. And often I'm being challenged on all of those fronts, but it's really important that we do consider how do we operate from this space. And also the importance of our identity. How do we hold fast to the information, mātauranga knowledge that is important to us? How do we learn it, and how also might we pass it on? So I'm going to end here. I don't know if you noticed, but the whakatauki of TEDx is kia whakato muri te haere whakamua. I walk backwards into the future with my eyes fixed on my past. So if I think about my life, which is how do I rediscover who I am? How do I reconnect and build the layer upon layer of what makes me a valuable part of my whānau? I've had to look to the past to help ground me in the present so that we can build technologies and opportunities for our whānau into the future. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou.